The immigration system, I mean...
I'm with her on this. Our immigration system is trash. Utter garbage. It is a hot mess. It needs to be reformed immediately. Welcome to this month's episode of Rigged. On this episode, I'm responding to a young woman's video on TikTok who describes what it's like moving from Europe to the US and compares the two different systems. Let's see what she has to say.
So I've been seeing a ton of videos on my FYP of Americans who move to Europe and talk about how much better it is to live in Europe than it is to live in the US. So as a European who moved to America, I feel like I can share an interesting perspective here. For context, I lived in London as a child and then my family moved to Ireland. That's where I went to university, and I've also lived in France. I've traveled all over Europe, and now I've been living in New York for 4.5 years, and I've done a bunch of summers here before that too. So I feel like I have a good breadth of experience of life in both.
So she did pick the US out of all these countries she's lived in, notably, right off the bat.
I think the biggest difference comes down to how the baseline level of things in life in Europe are just accounted for. Healthcare, schooling, just taken care of. Regardless of your income levels, you have access to those things.
Regardless of your income level in the US, you have access to those things. We provide free education, although it's not great, admittedly, because the government has a monopoly on it. We also mandate that people be able to get health care in this country, whether or not they're able to pay, which is one reason why when you do pay for your health care, it's so expensive, because we have to subsidize the cost of all the people who don't pay for their health care. So I really get annoyed right away when people say, in the US, they don't have this baseline. No, we do. We have it. We have it the same as every other country.
There are also incredible benefits and social programs all across Europe. Because of those things, the discrepancies in wealth are lower, and across European countries, people are generally happier and calmer.
That's not true. Actually, we've seen many statistics. I hate when they pull out this thing saying that people are happier in these other countries, because this has actually been thoroughly debunked. They are not happier. They do not have lower rates of depression or anxiety by any means. There's absolutely nothing to back that up. And when they say that the US is so high strung, I really do feel like a lot of these people just need to go out and actually talk to more people. Because yes, if you look online, everybody's kind of stressed out and has a lot of anxiety. And if you're in like major cities, maybe that's more true. But I travel the country all over, and the majority of people in America are pretty happy, pretty well adjusted, and touch grass frequently.
Because there aren't swaths of society in crisis mode to meet basic needs.
Crisis mode? Are some things too expensive in the US? Absolutely, and we can get into the reasons why that is, and they all trace back to government intervention in these sectors. But as a whole, people are not in crisis mode in the US. In fact, we're one of the richest countries that has ever existed. We have done amazing work to eliminate child hunger, to reduce poverty, to ensure that even countries outside the US see these things reducing as well. We're a very generous country, so this is a false narrative.
There are exceptions to that, I'm just broadly speaking. Whereas here in the US, you get nothing for nothing. Healthcare is the biggest one for me. It's enormously expensive. It's shocking that you pay if you're sick. It blows my mind, and I've been here for years.
All right, it is shockingly expensive how high healthcare has gotten in this country, and I've actually done episodes of my show Base that trace back the origins of why that is. And it all starts with government getting involved in this market, putting mandates on what we have to pay for in our healthcare system, blocking innovation, slowing down processes, actually limiting the number of people who can go to school to become doctors or nurses. They also limit how many beds we can have in a certain city, how many hospitals we can have. They do a lot of things to shrink the supply of healthcare in this country, which obviously makes the price more expensive. And they continuously give lots of perks to their crony friends in the insurance business, pushing us all into these insurance plans that are high cost, often are not customized, don't actually focus on wellness, and are attached to employment. All of that comes down to government mandates. If you get out of the government system of healthcare, which we can see microcosms of in the US, you find a very different picture. If you look at things like direct primary care, which is a model of providing care to patients that totally takes out the insurance companies and therefore removes a lot of the regulations and red tape that government had put into that market, you find things where people can pay for general care for something like $40 a month, and they get unlimited visits with that. They contract with their doctor directly. The doctor then negotiates things like testing on a cash-based service, and all of it ends up coming in much cheaper than what that person would pay for those same services through insurance. We also see that in fields like cosmetic surgery, which has notably never been covered by insurance. And because of that, that field too has been sort of excluded from all of this red tape and regulations that government has put into place with the insurance companies to embed itself in the market. And what we see in that industry is that prices have fallen drastically over the past couple of decades while services have actually improved. Techniques have gotten better. We've seen lots of innovation. We now see that people can get basic filler in their face where they used to have to pay $60,000 to get a facelift. They can now do that for $500 and get the same outcomes. That's amazing innovation, and we can again see the prices coming down and down and down in that industry. It's really not hard to understand why healthcare has gotten so expensive in this country, and it all traces back to government intervention in our market. Despite that fact, though, we still see a lot more progress in our healthcare industry than you see in Europe. Most of the innovation, most of the new drugs, most of the new techniques and procedures, most of the best surgeons and specialists, guess where they reside? All in the US. Why is that? It's because we haven't totally hamstringed our healthcare market and tied it to government, which is stifling and which kills innovation and which prevents new techniques from coming about like we see in Europe. And it's another reason why you see these people who live in these countries in Europe or in Canada, they get their basic medical care provided for them there. But guess what? They hop across our border to get specialists and to get other procedures done because the wait times are so long, they're costly, and because they don't have the best outcomes in those countries. So I think I know which one I'd pick.
The immigration system, I mean, this
I'm with her on this. Our immigration system is trash. Utter garbage. It is a hot mess. It needs to be reformed immediately. It's ridiculously convoluted. It's ridiculously expensive. We should want immigrants to come here. They make everything better. They provide rich culture. They provide amazing innovation, and we need them in our labor force. We're already struggling to get the number of people that we need to go to work in this country. We should have an arms wide open approach to immigration. We have nothing of the sort. Never listen to people who tell you we have an open border system. That is a joke. We have a years-long waiting list just to go through the basic procedures to come here and work legally, much less apply to actually become a citizen. It's trash. It's costly. It should change. I'm 100% with her on this.
Even when it comes down to schooling, you know, I've noticed I'm in my mid-20s. When I'm having these conversations about having children and getting married and stuff like that with friends, how much it costs is a huge factor because your kids' schooling will be funded based on the area that you can afford to live in.
All right, 100% on this too. We have a really problematic education system in the US. It traces back to the government, which decided decades ago that your child would go to a government-funded school based on the zip code that you live in. And that school would then be funded based on a portion of the property taxes that you were assigned. And so what we see is a very disproportionate education system where if you live in a lower income area, you pay less property taxes, your school has less funding, usually has worse outcomes. If you live in a more wealthy area, they have higher property taxes, ipso facto, you have a better education system. There is a lot of systemic racism tied up in that, thanks to redlining in the 1950s and 60s, which basically dictated where people of color could live in this country. And some of it was intentionally put into place to ensure that black children went to certain schools and white kids went to other schools after they were no longer allowed to legally explicitly do that after the Civil Rights Act. So I'm with her on this. I think our government education system is garbage. It consistently produces worse and worse outcomes, and we trap kids in failing schools based on their zip code, which is inherently unfair and wrong. Now, people in my movement have long since proposed a very common sense solution to that, which is called school choice. And essentially under that model, we would say that every family should get the portion of money that the state and locality spends on their child's education in an education savings account called an ESA. And they could then use those dollars to homeschool, to send their kids to private school, or to stay in the public school if they thought they were getting a good outcome. The notable thing about this is that the reason government schools are awful is not due to a lack of funding, really, though. We actually spend about $15,000 per year on average per child. The average cost of private school tuition per year per child is around $7,000 or less in most places. So we actually see that if we were to put ESAs in place, parents could likely get a better education for their kids for about half of what we spend on failing government schools.
The level of healthcare that they can receive is based on how much you can afford to provide them with. Everything is a much more financial decision than it is at home. And I think that's why the US is so career oriented. Like, the lows in the US are so much lower because of the basics of life not being accounted for, but the highs are so much higher. I say this to my friends all the time. We live like celebrities here.
Wow. That is... I think she just made our entire point for us. Like, yes, we work really hard. I disagree with her that our lows are lower. I've not seen any statistics that would actually back that up whatsoever. Every country has poor people. As a whole, people who are poor in the US live better than the vast majority of kings have lived throughout history. They tend to have central heat and air. They tend to have access to the food that they need through our government programs. They tend to have electricity. Many of them even have electronics and Wi-Fi. You can hardly say that people in the US who are living in poverty are worse off than people who are in poverty in other parts of the world. That being said, though, I think she does make a good point here that the highs are so much higher. The possibility is so much greater because we don't have people who are as burdened by taxes, high taxes, as you would see in Europe or Canada. And so if you are poor, you still have a lot more to work with. You can still work up and have a lot more social mobility than you might see in other countries where they really are kind of constrained by these government systems. And that's the point of these government systems. They want to have large healthcare. They want to have large education. They want to have these systems where you are dependent on them. In exchange, they take enough of your money and you become complacent and you never really seek to get better or improve or look to have any independence from that system. In the US, we thankfully have not gotten quite as far down that road, though we do still need to move a lot further back towards an actual free market capitalist system. And so we see that people are able to grab opportunities and take risk and make calculated investments and hopefully continue to improve and move up. And I've seen that in my own family. My grandfather had an 8th grade education. He worked in a pipe factory in Alabama. My dad then went to college. He was the first person in his family to go, and he was able to move up a social class. I then had the advantage of having that background, was able to go to an even better college and build an even bigger career, and on it goes. And so we do see that in America, while you have to work hard, that's a value we have. There's nothing negative about people working hard. I always think this is so weird when I see people put us down, like all Americans care about is work. No, we care about building a better life for ourselves and our families and actually continuing to improve as a society versus continuing to be complacent and live like people lived 100 years ago. That's a good thing.
Like, I don't know if any of you guys are on TikTok. There are kids in their 20s making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just the level of abundance that you can experience within the US is unmatched to anywhere else.
It really is. I mean, if you look at the things we have in the US, it actually blows my mind. We really do have such abundance, such access to things. I've often heard people, and I experience this too, when you travel to places like Italy. It's really nice to go see other countries, but you will find one kind of food in Italy. You will only find Italian food for the most part, and you're gonna eat Italian food every single day that you're there, and that's great, but eventually, as an American, you get really tired of it. Why? Because I have access to everybody's food in the US. I get to eat a million different kinds of cuisine. I get to try other kinds of cultures. I get to experience things without ever leaving the States that I don't think people in other countries have access to. It is incredible the amount of opportunity and the things that we get to experience in this country. And again, it's incredible that you can be born to a family in Alabama that hunted possum to stay alive, not even 2 generations back, and end up doing what I'm doing, where I get to sit in a studio and talk about economics and my opinion and get paid for it. It actually just gives me chills, the opportunities that we have and the number of stories we have of people who did pursue the American dream, who despite government intervention into our market, despite government doing a myriad of things that make our lives more expensive and harder, the amount of opportunity we still have despite those things in this country is incredible. And the opportunity to come here and work really hard and build something for yourself is something that people give up everything to pursue to come here. Notably, this woman who has traveled all over Europe and lived all over Europe has chosen to be here in the US. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why we have tens of thousands of people backlogged trying to come here just to work. Because the opportunity to come and work and to set your own course is a privilege most people throughout history have never known.
There are so many opportunities here that you just would never have access to in the rest of the world. Of course, there are layers of privilege involved, but there are opportunities to change your own life. I could talk about this stuff all day. Does anyone want to know more or have questions?
I really liked her video as a whole. I mean, I think that's such an interesting perspective. Obviously, someone who's moved here from Europe might not have as much insight into why our system is the way it is and to how things got to be expensive in certain sectors. But despite all of that, I love that she concludes with like the big but, right, at the turn of it, but even though this baseline might not feel the same as it feels in Europe, the opportunities, the ability to advance, the abundance here is so much greater. And that is because we do still have more of a free market system than the rest of the world. You've been watching Rigged. I'm curious, have you moved around the US or Europe and had an experience like hers? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, give us a like, share, and review, and we'll see you next month.